Hi, everybody. It's Thursday, May 9th. I just got out of the earliest possible screening I could see for Detective Pikachu, and I want to talk about the movie, give my impressions of it. So just a fair warning, I will talk about spoilers at some point during this video. So if you don't want the movie spoiled for you and you do want some surprises and stuff, don't watch this. There's not a lot to spoil, really. But there is some twists and turns throughout the movie that I will talk about, which I'll give a warning before we get into that section. So if you want to hear some spoilery talk about Detective Pikachu, keep watching. So without getting into spoiler territory, Detective Pikachu is great. It's a really fun film. It's super funny. It's a great nod to film noir. Justice Smith does a great job in this movie, playing Tim. Catherine Newton does a good job in this movie as well. She plays like a news reporter who's trying to kind of crack this case as well, along with Tim and Detective Pikachu. And of course, Ryan Reynolds does Detective Pikachu really well. It was so weird watching the first trailers and hearing Ryan Reynolds' voice as Detective Pikachu and just thinking it was kind of weird and like, this doesn't really fit. But honestly, like at a certain point in the movie, I just completely forgot that Ryan Reynolds was playing Detective Pikachu. I was just like, oh, that's Pikachu. Like, that's just Detective Pikachu. And then occasionally remembered, oh shit, yeah, that's Ryan Reynolds doing this voice. Okay. At the very beginning, I was still getting used to Detective Pikachu talking and sounding like Ryan Reynolds. But after a little bit of the movie, it just became so normal and I just became so used to it that I wasn't even thinking about it anymore. And it's such a weird movie tonally because it has that like dark and gritty look to it, but it's a comedy. And so it's so weird how different those tones kind of mesh together, but it really works. There's no point where I just felt like the comedy was like overdone, there was just too much of it, or that it just like there wasn't any long periods where something wasn't funny. Like there was constant comedy, but it didn't feel overbearing or forced. It felt really good and like natural. So it was truly just an enjoyable movie. I have to say, there's a bunch of little nods. There's a million like nods to Pokemon things throughout the entire movie. Things regarding the games, anime, general lore of the Pokemon world, what have you. There's just a bunch of things that they kind of reference and talk about. And I have to be honest, as someone who loves Pokemon, I really enjoyed this. But I feel like if I didn't like Pokemon or didn't know a lot about Pokemon, I would have a pretty hard time kind of following some of the stuff that was referenced in some of the dialogue. And I would just be a little confused in certain areas of the plot, sort of. One of the examples I'll give regarding this, and this isn't important to the plot like in any way, so I'm not going to count it as a spoiler or anything. And it happens within the first like 5 minutes of the movie. So at the beginning of the film, Tim and his friend are walking through a field, and Tim's friend is trying to get Tim to catch a Pokemon, because he's like, hey, you're really, you've been really lonely and stuff. You need a partner Pokemon to catch and have as your own. And so in the field, they see this Cubone. And so this Cubone's out there just crying in the field, and it's really funny and really enjoyable. So if you're familiar with Pokemon, you know that in the Pokemon lore, Cubone's skull is the skull of his dead mother. A casual audience member has no idea that is the lore of Pokemon. And so when Tim is walking towards Cubone with the Pokeball to go catch him, he ends up referencing that, and he says something to the effect of like, hey, Cubone, like he's like trying to like calm him down because he's crying a bunch. And so he's like, or he says, I'm going to completely butcher the line, but it's something to the effect of like, hey, what's it like wearing the skull of your dead relative or something like that. And it's like, if I didn't know that was the lore behind Cubone, I would be so confused as to why he said that, or I'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So, but this definitely is a movie that is definitely like a labor of love for the Pokemon fans. If you love Pokemon, I think you'll love this movie. It's got a lot of heart put into it, and you can definitely tell. So yeah, so like if you don't know a lot about Pokemon, going into this, they don't really explain much about Pokemon. It's just, they just pretend like this is the world, and you just have to know enough about Pokemon to kind of enjoy the movie. I was also pleasantly surprised with Bulbasaur in the movie, because Bulbasaur, like in the anime, talks, like Bulbasaur, like he says his name in that kind of voice. The Bulbasaur don't do that in this movie. They just are like high pitched, like meh, like noises, like, and it's really cute and it's awesome, and they look super adorable. How they're designed and how they move, they kind of waddle and stuff. It's so pleasant to just see these Bulbasaur in this world walk in and being like really cute. They're like little derpy frogs, kind of. It's super awesome. So I actually really liked that they tried making some of the Pokemon specifically much cuter than they appeared in the anime. This will be your official warning for spoilers. If you don't want to have anything spoiled about the movie, about the plot and stuff, click away. So the general plot, if you haven't really gathered from the trailers, is that Tim's dad, Harry, dies, or like you're supposed to think that he dies, or they're not sure if he dies because he gets into like a car crash. And so Tim and Detective Pikachu have to go solve this mystery of what happened to Tim's dad. The movie started off with Mewtwo in this Pokemon lab. And I was very surprised that they just kind of jumped right into that, because I thought Mewtwo would be not that important to the plot, or would kind of come in a little bit later in the movie or something, but they just jumped right into like the science experiment went wrong. So they start with like the scientists in this Pokemon lab talking, and Mewtwo's in the thing, and he breaks out and he starts raging havoc, and he kind of like hypothetically kills people in the Pokemon lab and stuff. And then there's just a car that's driving away from the lab, and Mewtwo is following it. And then there's something that comes and hits the car, and the car flips over and like blows up. And so it started off kind of like high action, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. We're kicking it off pretty hard. So then obviously Tim goes through the bit with his friend and the Cubone and stuff, and he and his friend go back, and Tim gets all these calls from the police department to basically tell him that his dad died in a car accident. So then Tim goes to his dad's like apartment, and the whole story is about like Tim's mom passed away, and his dad was off doing detective work and stuff. So Tim was just kind of doesn't really have either of his parents in his life, and he hadn't talked to his dad in years or something. So then upon hearing that his dad died, he goes to his dad's apartment, and finds some stuff that's like, oh, my dad kind of cared about me a little bit and stuff like that. So there's a whole plot about Tim like reuniting with his dad because his dad wasn't there for him and stuff like that. So while Tim is in his dad's apartment, he kind of finds some papers that talk about, Mew being cloned and stuff. It's also worth noting that this movie takes place after Pokemon, the first movie, when they clone Mew and make Mewtwo pretty much. This happens, it was like 5 or 10 years after or something like that. So a lot of what's happening in the Pokemon universe is still canon in this universe. They reference it later where they're like, 10 years ago, Mewtwo was cloned in the Kanto region and escaped, blah, blah, blah. And so that's like a big, like kind of a plot point much later in the film. So anyway, so as Tim is in his dad's apartment, he finds this little vial, little like kind of like a test tube of this like purple gas that he accidentally like opens up, and it just starts going everywhere, and it's this gas that causes Pokemon to act kind of crazy and to be a lot more vile and like attack you and stuff like that. All the Apom that are hanging out outside his dad's apartment breathe in this purple gas, and they start to kind of go apeshit. After Tim ends up meeting Detective Pikachu, and they do the whole exchange, oh, you can talk, you can understand me, that kind of thing. When they do that whole exchange, then some of the Apom break into the apartment, and they go on a bit of a chase scene and stuff. They end up meeting up with Lucy later, because they kind of realize that the purple gas, which they call like the R gas, R as in like Team Rocket. So basically what you kind of need to know about the plot is that Detective Pikachu is Harry's, Tim's dad's Pikachu. That's his Detective Pikachu that went on with him and did detective work and stuff. So that's why Pikachu ends up going to Harry's apartment. In the world of Rhyme City, battling Pokemon and catching Pokemon is like illegal and stuff. Like, so they go to this underground battle, which is extremely illegal. And the one guy that's there with the Charizard recognizes Detective Pikachu as Harry's Pikachu. And so Tim wants to get the information from him. Hey, do you know like where Harry is, or do you know where they were going, or do you know anything about it? So the guy's all like, battle me and I'll tell you what you need to know. And so the guy who's battling with his Charizard has the R gas and gives Charizard a bunch of R gas so that Charizard starts going crazy and wants to like literally eat Pikachu pretty much. So they end up meeting with Lucy later. They sneak into this news place to where Lucy works as an intern and is trying to be like, hey, we need you to help us solve this case and stuff. One of the main guys in the movie, Howard Clifford is the character's name, is the one that built Rhyme City so that Pokemon and people could live harmoniously and stuff. And his son, Roger Clifford, is head of like the news and everything like that. Howard Clifford is in a wheelchair and he's a paraplegic and he's in a wheelchair, so he can't really go places. The whole world is technologically advanced, so they have like holographic capabilities that we simply just don't have in the current year. And so at some point, Tim ends up going to talk to Howard Clifford in his office and stuff. So Howard is basically able to show Tim a holographic version of the car crash, basically saying like, oh, this is a simulated hologram based on the security footage from the actual thing. But this allows you to see stuff that the government doesn't want you to see and stuff like that. Which makes no sense, absolutely no sense, because if the cameras didn't capture certain things, they wouldn't know how to program the holograms to show those aspects. Yeah, when they walk around the hologram of the car, they see Detective Pikachu and Tim's dad crawling out of the car, like, oh, they're still alive and everything. So you're like, oh, of course they're still alive. They gotta go reunite, Tim with his dad and stuff. But in the whole movie, it was a very interesting creative choice because they never really show you what Tim's dad looks like. They constantly try to hide his face and stuff. The hologram ends up showing Mewtwo coming over to them, and he like makes Detective Pikachu fall asleep or like takes away his memories. And so Detective Pikachu's like, oh, that's why I can't remember anything. And then he ends up picking up, Mewtwo uses his psychic abilities to pick up Tim's dad, and they go somewhere apparently. But then the hologram ends and that's all that they see. Tim decides that he needs to go to that Pokemon lab and figure out the secret of, Mewtwo and his dad and figure out what's going on. The second, like, half of the movie happens at this Pokemon lab where they're walking around. And there's definitely plot points that don't make any sense whatsoever, but only exist just because they have to move the plot along. It's pretty much, like the idea that this hologram is able to simulate the car crash, but also show his dad and Detective Pikachu crawling out and stuff, despite the fact that hypothetically there were no security cameras that captured that. If the government doesn't want you to see that information, then how would the hologram have known? It's all this like, it's pretty weird, like plot wise. There's certain things that make absolutely no sense whatsoever. But because you have to just sort of accept that this world is so technologically advanced that there's some explanation in the context of this world that we just can't fathom because our technology isn't up to their standards of technology. So you kind of just have to accept a lot of the stuff they kind of throw at you. But so basically they go on this adventure to the Pokemon lab. Howard Clifford's son, Roger Clifford, is like in the backseat of a car on his way presumably to the lab or going from the lab somewhere to Rhyme City. Wherever he is going, they never really show where he's going, but wherever he is going, he like has like this laptop that he opens up because there are security cameras around the lab that sense that people are walking around there when they shouldn't be. And so he's able to like remotely operate the lab from his little like laptop thing. Because again, it's so technologically advanced that this is just a thing that can happen. He ends up like looking at it through the cameras and he can hear it perfectly clear what they're talking about. So they try to discover all the secrets of the Pokemon lab and stuff. That's when like Roger decides to remotely open up the cages of all the Greninjas that run out and attack them and stuff in the lab and stuff. Tim and Detective Pikachu go into the room where they were housing Mewtwo in this like ball, in this giant ball that's in this containment ball, essentially. They hit something and they're able to see this giant hologram that somehow recorded exactly what happened when Mewtwo ended up breaking out and stuff. And so because technology. And so they end up seeing Mewtwo break out and stuff, and they end up rewinding it and trying to see, how exactly Mewtwo got in there. They discover it was Tim's dad who had gone out and captured Mewtwo and brought him back to the lab so they could contain him and try to fit and create all the R gas that exists throughout the entire movie. So somehow that happens despite the fact that Mewtwo is supposed to be super powerful, and there's just no way that he would have been able to somehow capture him unless they used the magical technology that they just have in this world. It's just not possible, but whatever. They end up seeing that Detective Pikachu is the one that freed Mewtwo. He uses his electricity to short circuit something that ends up allowing Mewtwo to escape from the containment center, and then that's when Mewtwo ends up pretty much blowing up the car. And so Detective Pikachu is like, oh no, I'm the one that betrayed Tim's dad. Oh, I can't believe I would do this to Harry and all this stuff. So Detective Pikachu is like, no, don't talk to me and stuff. So Detective Pikachu sort of goes through a bit of a crisis. And so yeah, after they see the holograms and stuff, they run from all the Greninjas who are chasing them. And they run outside. There's this big sequence with Torterras in the lab. They end up seeing this little room of Torterras who are just kind of normal sized Torterras, but they look down and it's test 33 or whatever. And it says it's like a growth test. So they were like, well, these Torterras look, normal size. Maybe it hasn't kicked in yet, or it doesn't work or something. And so then they run outside through the Torterra area into this it's called the Torterra Garden. Another thing that's important to mention in this movie is that Psyduck, if he gets stressed out in the movie, will use his psychic abilities and it quote unquote explode everything around and stuff. So they try their best not to stress Psyduck out, which as far as continuity, Psyduck would have been stressed out much easier than he ended up getting stressed out. They act like his capability of getting stressed out is so fragile that on the way to the lab, they got to listen to spa music, and Detective Pikachu has to give him a foot massage so that he doesn't get stressed out and blow them up pretty much. Even when they're running in the lab from the Greninjas and stuff, I'm like, well, Psyduck would have been way the fuck stressed out and would have already blown everything up, but it was convenient to the plot that he didn't quite yet, because once they get outside and the Greninjas are chasing them, then they intentionally try to stress out Psyduck so that he uses his psychic abilities and knocks the Greninjas away, which also knocks everybody else to the ground. But in the context of the movie, I'm sitting there going, wouldn't Psyduck have killed them or something? He was so close to all of them. He was literally riding on Lucy's back. He would have fucking killed them all, but he didn't, because the movie needs that to be. So there's definitely moments in the movie where you're there's some weird plot hole or some random thing that you're that wouldn't have happened or whatever. But anyway, so they're running outside and then all the ground starts moving and it ends up being these giant Torterras, which was really cool, but they end up it ends up causing the earth to split in half, and Lucy and Psyduck are on one side and Tim and Detective Pikachu are on the other side. And so they're Tim's Pikachu, we gotta jump over there. And so they jump over and stuff, and it's action packed and it's super fun to watch. It's a fun sequence for sure. Then at a point, Detective Pikachu gets hit with a rock, a kind of a small rock on his side, and he almost dies. And it's a really touching moment. It's made me, I almost cried a little bit. I was starting to tear up a little because I was like, no, Pikachu, don't die. So, and then this is the part where you see all the Bulbasaur and stuff. And so they get more Bulbasaur just to lead them down to this rock where Mewtwo ends up coming out. And I'm like, oh shit, it's Mewtwo. He ends up just coming out and basically healing Detective Pikachu. And he ends up saying oh, thanks Pikachu for bringing the sun to me. And so Detective Pikachu apparently was supposed to lead Tim to Mewtwo. And then Roger Clifford comes with these electric drones that float around Mewtwo and zap him and contain him, and they carry him into this truck and they drive away. So then Pikachu and Tim end up splitting up. Pikachu goes on his own walking thing. It's actually, there's this really fun moment where Detective Pikachu is just singing the Pokemon theme song, which is really, really genuinely fun, because it's oh, Ryan Reynolds is literally just singing the Pokemon theme song, but he's half crying while he's doing it. It's really cute. It was very fun. I was so happy that it was in there. Tim and Lucy and Psyduck are back in Rhyme City. Tim goes up to talk to Howard, and turns out Howard's the bad guy. Whoa, who knew? And so because Howard's a paraplegic, he somehow finds out that with this device that they've constructed where he puts this like little thing on his head, and there's another exact same thing on Mewtwo's head. And Howard decides that he can put his consciousness into Mewtwo using the R gas. When Mewtwo's in this like state of kind of craziness, he's able to operate the machine and put his mind into Mewtwo so that Howard just becomes Mewtwo. So now he's a Pokemon. And he explains that Mewtwo has the ability to merge, to put the consciousness of humans into Pokemon. Apparently Mewtwo just has that ability, which he doesn't. He doesn't at all in any Pokemon media that I've ever seen in my life. But the only way Mewtwo can do it is if the Pokemon are affected by the R gas and are in that state of craziness. Then Mewtwo has the ability to put basically the Pokemon's partner human into their body. So that's what he ends up doing. So during the scene where there's all the Pokemon balloons and stuff, those are filled with the R gas so that all of the R gas gets out and all the Pokemon inhale it and start going crazy. And then Mewtwo just goes and zaps them all, and all the humans start becoming, all the consciousness of the humans go into the Pokemon. So it's weird where like Lucy herself as well gets pretty much sucked into her Psyduck. It's a very weird plot thing. It's super bizarre, and I was like, oh, what the fuck? But I was just kind of into it. I was like, okay, here we go. This is a thing that's happening. When Detective Pikachu's like singing the Pokemon theme song, he's walking, he discovers that it was like a Greninja star that was the thing that hit the car that caused the car crash, and that he realizes that Mewtwo was just trying to save them. So that's how you know Mewtwo's the good guy this whole time. So anyway, Detective Pikachu ends up fighting Mewtwo and using Volt Tackle and knocks Mewtwo like into a building. And then it turns out Howard's son, Roger, is also a good guy. And you're like, oh shit, he's a good guy this whole time. The bad version of Howard that we had seen throughout the movie was actually just a Ditto who had transformed into Roger. So there's this like fun battle where Tim has to fight this Ditto that is transforming into other things. And they do poke fun at like the one episode of the anime where the one Ditto, his eyes are really small and stuff. So yeah, a lot of the Pokemon he transforms into he can transform into Pokemon and humans, and all of them have these like small beady eyes, which is very funny because he does transform into Lucy at some point to kind of like trick Tim, and it looks so funny seeing Catherine Newton with these just small fucking eyes. It's really funny, and it definitely got a big laugh out of the audience. Anyway, so they fight and stuff. When Howard goes into Mewtwo, it's just his consciousness. His body is still in the office, which seems like something that he would have thought to do something with. And the thing is still connected to his head. So Tim just goes over and just takes the thing off his head, and that ends up putting his consciousness back into his body, and Mewtwo is back to being regular Mewtwo. So then here's like the biggest plot twist in the entire movie. So this is a massive spoiler. This is the biggest one, and it is the most bizarre fucking thing. So the whole time Mewtwo is talking to Tim, and he's like, oh, there's one last thing we need to do. And Tim's like, yeah, you need to take me to my father. And Mewtwo's like, your father was with you the whole time. And it turns out Detective Pikachu is Tim's father. It was like Tim's father's consciousness was put into Pikachu so that Pikachu could talk to him and stuff. So it's not like Detective Pikachu legitimately had sex with his mom or anything like that. Like, no, like his that's why you never see his dad's face throughout the movie, because you're not supposed to know that it literally is Ryan Reynolds is his dad, like literally just plays his dad. So then the scene at the very end of the movie literally shows Ryan Reynolds in human form standing next to Detective Pikachu. Detective Pikachu has just got a normal Pikachu voice. So he ends up like reuniting with Tim. And Tim decides that he wants to stay and spend time with his dad and have his dad back in his life and stuff. So it's a very touching moment, but like, it got the weirdest reaction seeing Ryan Reynolds just standing there as Ryan Reynolds, pretty much just next to Detective. Super weird. And it was like so bizarre, but it was like really, but it was so funny too. Like it was so enjoyable. Yeah. So effectively that's the movie of Detective Pikachu. It's so, there's so many things in there that Pokemon fans are really going to love. There's a lot of weird plot points that don't make a lot of sense, but they're just kind of there because they need the story to progress. There's definitely moments of this just happens because it's a movie. and because something needs to happen and they need some sort of resolution. But I enjoyed it. It was a very genuinely fun experience. But yeah, so anyway, to conclude my thoughts, Detective Pikachu is a great movie. It's an amazing nod for Pokemon fans. If you love Pokemon, you're gonna love this movie. And even if you're not sure if you're gonna love it, I just say watch it anyway, just to kind of experience what this movie is, because it's so weird and it's so fun. And it's just a genuinely good time. It's finally, like, the first live action Pokemon movie we've ever had, and it was done really, really well. And so I'm hoping the movie does well, because I would love. They've already confirmed that there's going to be a sequel to the movie, and they're already going to be making more live action Pokemon movies in the same general universe. I think they are planning to make a movie all about, based on the games Red and Blue, and actually follow Red as a character and his story through his Pokemon journey and stuff. So it'll be really interesting to see where they kind of take these movies from here on out. So if you've seen Detective Pikachu, feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what you thought about the movie. But that's all I've got. So thank you guys so much for watching and listening to me ramble about Detective Pikachu. And until next time, bye.